Hi, I'm Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, and welcome to another episode of the ChickenHead Chronicles, my 8-bit show. Now today, it's really going to be a review of the absolutely awesome Ultimate 1541-2 from Gideons Logic, but I also want to cover the reasons why I've made this machine, my Commodore 128 DCR, my main machine and my only Commodore 8-bit that's currently hooked up at this studio. This little beauty right here is my Commodore 128 DCR. Now the DCR is the North American version, NTSC version, so it's vastly superior to PAL, as Tim Drew knows. And instead of having a plastic case with a little drawer for the keyboard to go under, this one is a mostly metal case and is designed a little bit differently and has slightly different innards. Now, if you're watching this, you probably know what a Commodore 128 is, but for those that don't, let me go over it just a little bit. So after the fiasco that was the Commodore TED series, and that's like the +4 and the +16, and I think it's, what is that, 216 is a European one. After that fiasco, a lot of people said, golly jeepers, Commodore, we don't want a brand new machine that's incompatible. We want something that's backwards compatible to the Commodore 64, but is just bigger, better, faster, more. And the Commodore 128, the flat one, was the answer to that. Now, there's all kinds of absolutely awesome stories about the creation of the Commodore 128, and I'm not going to go into those today. Maybe we'll do that another time. But let's just go over some of the features of it. Now, at its heart, it's similar to a Commodore 64. Still based on a 6502 processor. Of course, Commodore 64 had the 6510. This one has like the 8510. Just more features, more advanced features in the processor. It's got a very similar graphics chip, the VIC graphics chip. It's got a very similar floppy interface and printer interface. All of it backwards compatible. The cartridge port is physically the same. It just kicks everything up a notch. For example, obviously it has 128 kilobytes of RAM instead of 64 kilobytes. And a lot more of that is available to BASIC because of much better memory management in the unit. The CPU, you can also crank up to 2 megahertz. That's right, count them, 2 whole megahertz. The caveat to that is the 2 megahertz mode really only works well in the 80 column display, like my pocket writer here is an 80 column display. It really works well in that. When you crank it up to 2 megahertz using the standard VIC chip and its 40 column display, it blanks the screen because the VIC chip is not compatible with 2 megahertz. Kind of stinks. Your program's still running, it's still running at a full 2 megahertz. So people did a lot of little tricks. Like, for example, if they wrote a BASIC program that needed to read in a bunch of data or, create sprites or something like that, in their BASIC program, they'd set it to 2 megahertz. It would go and it would create the data at twice the speed and then switch back to 1 megahertz so it could display everything on the screen. The other thing some creative people did was they would crank it to 2 megahertz while the screen was redrawing. At the top of the screen where the little borders are, it'd be 2 megahertz. It gets to the screen where you read stuff, it slows to 1 megahertz, gets to the bottom screen, goes back to 2 megahertz and does it again. This has the effect of speeding up almost any Commodore 128 program by about 20%. So that's kind of cool. Now, really importantly, what this had was a VDC chip in addition to a VIC chip. This is what enables the beautiful 80 column display. The back of the machine, which we'll look at in a minute, has a standard like a 9-pin CGA monitor port. You plug a nice monitor into there, you get a rock solid crisp 640 by 200 display in up to 16 colors. Suck on that CGA, and really, really beautiful display. It was not fully compatible with Commodore graphics. There's some caveats using Commodore graphics with it, but it was somewhat compatible. And you could switch back and forth between the two pretty easily. Now, what really rocked with the Commodore 128 was the new burst mode that was available with the Commodore 1571 double-sided disk drives, like the one that's inside here, or the 1581 drive. That will speed up disk operations like 10 times literally 10 times. So gone were the complaints about slow disk access on the Commodore 8-bits, because this thing flies. It's unbelievable how fast it really is. And lastly, the Commodore 128 actually has a second CPU. I mean, we were multiprocessing before multiprocessing was cool. Okay, you can only use one at a time. But with a Z80 processor in there, in addition to doing a few other things, like the Z80 initializes the computer and determines whether it's supposed to boot into Commodore 128 mode, Commodore 64 mode, or CP/M mode. But mainly, the Z80 was used to run actual CP/M. Now, CP/M is awesome. It came out in the mid-70s and was popular up through the early 80s. And MS-DOS is a direct copy, a stolen copy of CP/M. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But there were tens of thousands of programs available for CP/M, and the Commodore 128 could run all of them beautifully. It even had advantages like being able to read almost any CP/M disk out there. Most CP/M computers, if you had an Osborne, it could read Osborne disks. If you had a K-Pro, you could read K-Pro disks. Got a Commodore 128, who cares? It'll read them all, because Commodore's awesome. Now, I'll do a full video on CP/M because it deserves its own video about all the cool things we can do with it. And there's not enough information out there about CP/M and the 128. Lastly, there's a new version of BASIC on the Commodore 128. That's BASIC 7. Now it's bigger, so people say it runs slower, and it does, but it adds all the graphics commands we've always wanted to draw circles and squares and paint on the screen. It adds fantastic audio commands, and really importantly, it adds good disk commands, really powerful disk commands for opening, saving files, reading directories that are much better than the basic 2.0 commands in the Commodore 64. Now, one of the greatest features and the greatest drawback of the Commodore 128 is the ability to go into Commodore 64 mode. Super easy to do. Let me show you how to do it. Normally when you boot up a Commodore 128, it goes into normal, like 40 column Commodore 128 mode, which is great. Basic version 7, 122,000 bytes free. There's a copyright from some company called Microsoft. You know, who knows? They probably went out of business decades ago, but the copyright notice is there. So you can use this in 128 mode, great. But when you want to run Commodore 64 software, you just type Go 64. Are you sure? Yeah. And look what happens. Skidamarinka-doo. It's a Commodore 64. Now you'll notice the screen looks a little different. That's because I have Jiffy DOS enabled. Normally it just has the normal Commodore 64 screen on here. You can run virtually 100% of all the Commodore 64 out there, software that's out there, just like this. And it still has access to all the peripherals. It has access to the 1571 and everything else that's on this machine. You can also start Commodore 64 mode by putting a Commodore 64 compatible cartridge in the cartridge slot, or by holding the Commodore key down, which is what I'm doing as I'm awkwardly bent over here, holding down the Commodore key, turning on the Commodore 64, and the Z80 chip kicks in and says, oh, Commodore key's held down. Let's boot into Commodore 64 mode. So why do I say this is both its greatest feature and greatest detriment? Well, greatest feature because we have access to the entire library of tens of thousands of Commodore 64 games, Commodore 64 programs that were available. They all run great on here. Greatest detriment is most game manufacturers just thought, oh, well, it's got a Commodore 64 in it. There's still millions of Commodore 64s out there. Let's not write games that take advantage of the advanced features of the Commodore 128. We'll just keep writing Commodore 64 games because this thing will run it anyways. And so fewer games were created for it. But tons of productivity software was. Now there's this great misnomer out there from people my age. I think I'm like 29 now, but okay, maybe I'm 54. People my age, a lot of them say, oh, Commodore 128, all anybody ever did with it is type Go 64 and go into Commodore 64 mode. Nobody used the 128 mode. That's not true at all. See, what's going on is these kids are remembering that they were little teenagers that wanted to play Miss Pac-Man and Raid on Bungling Bay, and that's what they did on the family computer. Oh, go 64, let's go to 64, you know, not realizing that their parents were using it as an actual computer and booting it into 128 mode and using the absolute ton of really high quality productivity software that was released for the Commodore 128. And I'm talking a lot. You know, name me 5 word processors that are available right now for Windows 11. Let's see, Word, I think maybe somebody makes Word Perfect still, LibreOffice, that's about it. On the Commodore 128, there was like half a dozen, 7, 8, 9 different really, really good word processors designed specifically for the Commodore 128 and its beautiful 80-column mode. Things were different than you remember them. Honest to goodness, things were different. So this leads me to my decision to use my Commodore 128 DCR as my daily driver Commodore machine. Now, in the past, I've got 2 really nice Commodore 64Cs, one NTSC, one PAL, that my buddy Tim Drew got me set up with. Love them, all right? And then I've got a Commodore 64 that has one of the individual computers cases, one of those. It's a beautiful black case. It's up in the wall over there. Brand new keycaps from Jim Drew. Beautiful machine. So I had all these Commodore 64s hooked up, but there were so many of them, I didn't get anything done. I go, oh, let's do this, let's do that. No, I got distracted. Let's do this. And so I found myself never really finishing a project because I was always distracted by all the shiny toys all around. I don't know, like not getting back to my episode 2 of my Geos video that I made like 3 or 4 years ago. You know, you just get distracted. So I thought, that's it. These things are going in the dumpster. So I took all my Commodore 64s and I shoved them in a dumpster, crammed them down to the... No, I didn't. They're retired right now and they're sitting beautifully set up on the wall behind me, ready to be hooked up at a moment's notice. And I will hook them up again. I'm sure I'll get the bug to go back to them. But right now, this is my 8-bit Commodore computer that I've got hooked up. This is the one that I use. And I'm able to concentrate on doing what I need to do when I'm not distracted with a million other things. So let's talk about my specific Commodore 128D. It's in really great shape. I got this from John from Commodore Forever a couple of years ago. Keyboard's in great shape. The unit's in great shape. But what, you ask, are these little switches in the front here? Well, that switch right there switches between Jiffy DOS or normal disk DOS. And of course, Jiffy DOS adds a bunch of commands to access your drives much more easily, and it speeds everything up. And it works both in Commodore 64 mode and it works in Commodore 128 mode with the internal disk drive, which is really awesome. I'd say about 75% of the time I have Jiffy DOS enabled. The biggest disadvantage of using Jiffy DOS, besides a little bit of incompatibility, is it deactivates your cassette ports. You can't load those cassette games. I didn't have very many either. Anyways, so what's this here? Huh. Bill Hurd. Never heard of him. Haha, get it? I was at VCF SoCal last year and Bill was there and I had him sign my precious 128 DCR. Man, that adds at least $12.38 to the price of this thing if I put it up on eBay tomorrow. Now over here we have the tape port, which is in a rather inconvenient location for reasons I'll cover in a minute. We've got the keyboard connector, big old bulky keyboard connector whose cable's always too short. Now I have a nice 1351 mouse. That's the real Commodore mouse. Works great with Geos and many other programs. Joystick port. You've got reset buttons on here, both for the internal floppy and for the system itself. And what's this little switch? This is a lifesaver right here. This will switch the internal 1571 drive from drive 8 to drive 9, which is important when you're using the star of the show, this little guy, Gideon Logic's Ultimate 1541, which we're going to be talking about in detail in a moment. But then around the back here, look how Gideon's Logic is hooked up. Now, this device, if you're not too familiar with it, connects to your IEC port and acts like a, full-fledged 1541 drive. So it needs to be connected to IEC, but it only has one port. So it has to be the last device on the IEC chain or the only device on it, which means when you've got like a nice 1571 drive like I have here and a nice 1581 drive like I have here hooked up and a printer hooked up, they're all daisy chained together with IEC, but most off-brand printers only have one IEC port, so it wants to be the last device on the chain. So what's a guy to do? You got two devices that only have one port and only want to be the last device. Well, you get one of these IEC splitters. See that right there? It's got a cable going out directly into the Gideon logic device and a second cable going out that starts the chain. So it allows you to have basically two devices that only have one port. Works just fine, splits it off. I'll put a link in the description about where to get that cable. It's a lifesaver with a 1541 Ultimate. And this, of course, I did a video on this one. This is Sven Puk's nice little box that allows you to hook up a 80 column display. Plugs right into the 80 column port. Lets you switch right here between 40 and 80 column output because it uplinks directly to the standard 40 column video port. Pumps all the graphics out right through SCART, and then I've got a little SCART to HDMI adapter, which then of course hooks up to my modern HDMI monitor. Pretty cool. And then in the back there we've got a the communication port, which is not currently in use. Now, of course, the star of today's episode is Gideon Logic's 1541 emulator, the Ultimate 1541 2. Now this, look how beautiful that is. I got it in black because it matched my beautiful little Commodore 64 in black. You know what? Let me just show you that guy. He's right around the corner here. Look at her. Isn't she pretty? With nice white keycaps from Jim Drew and a black 1541. Yeah, that's a paint job. This plugs right into the cartridge port. And on the side it has a standard mini USB. That's just for extra power if you need it. I don't. It has two, count them, two USB 2.0 ports right here that you can put USB drives in. You could put, heck, you could probably put a USB floppy in there and it'd probably read that. You could put a USB hard drive in there, it'll read that. It has a standard Ethernet port that we're going to be covering in a bit. On the back, there's three buttons that are hard to see because it's all in black. The middle one is the one you'll be using all the time. That brings up the Ultimate interface. The other two are programmed to work like freezer cartridges on your if it emulates a freezer cartridge. On the other side, we have an IEC port right here. This port, be careful with it. It looks like it's a USB 3 port. It is not. It is a USB 2 port that is blue because it's using extra pins to work with this little guy. This little guy plugs in to the tape port right over here. All right. But you notice it doesn't plug in because the tape port on the 1541 desk or on the Commodore 128 desktop is recessed and has these little things here and it doesn't fit in. Literally, if I were to use this, I would have to chop off these plastic pieces on the side. But what this does is that plugs into your tape port, and then this cable plugs into your blue connection on the side, and you can load tap files right from a USB drive, and it acts just like it's working through a tape port. This does not work out of the box on a Commodore 128 DCR because, number one, the cable's not long enough, and it uses a special USB cable, one of the ones that has the double side end right there. And number two, because it physically doesn't fit without modifying it. On a flat Commodore 128, these work just fine. She also has two audio connectors here. One of them is audio out, the other one's audio in for taking other audio sources and mixing them with a SID. We're going to talk a little bit about the audio capabilities of this, but in a nutshell, this thing can emulate via hardware 2 SID chips and play back stereo sound with 2 virtual SID chips that exist in the code right here. It's actually pretty cool. Let's go ahead and hook this up and I'll show you what it can do. So I'd already mentioned that the Ultimate 1541-2 is basically a 1541 drive emulator. That was its original purpose. If you reach around the back of the machine and press the center button I was telling you about, it comes up with the actual interface for the 1541 Ultimate. You see it's got its own flash disk, its own RAM disk. It's reading my USB drive on here. If I had 2 USB drives in here, it'd read 2 of those. And it's telling me I'm connected to my network because it is network capable, which we'll go over in a little bit. As a basic setup, all right, just the basic stuff that it can do, you're going to use the cursor keys to go down and select which disk you want it to emulate. Okay, we're going to go and look at my USB drive. Let's look at my contents of my USB drive. We're going to go into the Commodore 64 folder and we're going to look at D and we're going to go Dig Dug Revival. We're now telling it we can mount the disk, we can run the disk directly. That means it'll kind of work sort of like an auto boot. We can mount it as read-only, or we can mount it on drive B, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're just going to mount the disk right now. Now that disk is mounted. Now I'm using Jiffy DOS, so there's some shortcut commands I can use. You can use @ $, and it's going to read the directory and tell you what's on the disk. Dig Dug Revival. Okay, is Dig Dug Revival going to work in Commodore 128 mode? Nope. Let's go to 64 mode. And even though the system just rebooted into Commodore 64 mode, it still thinks that the Dig Dug disk is in the virtual 1541 drive. It's not reading off of my currently assigned disk 9 1571. It's reading it off the Ultimate 1541. So let's go ahead and load the program, and this will be fun to see how fast it loads with Jiffy DOS. Once the program is loaded in, just run it normally, and we're on to Dig Dug Revival. I did a review on this a couple of months ago. Okay, a couple of years ago. Now, the best thing about this new release, Dig Dug Revival, that came out a couple of years ago, is it has actual good audio, unlike the original Dig Dug for the Commodore 64 that had great gameplay, but horrible audio. Get this game. Now here's the awesome thing about the Ultimate 1541. When we go in here and we pick something that is actually on a different kind of disk, like let's go here to Commodore 128, let's go to D desk term, all right? See, that's a D81, not a D64. So it is thinking that this is a Commodore 1581 disk image. Mount the disk. Change drive type to 1581, okay. And right then and there, when we go and look at this thing, it thinks that there's a Commodore 1581 on drive 8 that the Ultimate 1541 is emulating. Look at that, 2035 blocks free with all that stuff on desk term right there. And it auto boots too. Now, if we choose an auto booting disk, for example, let's go in here to my Commodore 128. Let's launch Pocket Writer, which is a fantastic program that we're going to be doing a huge review on soon. It's going to mount it as a D71 disk, so change drive type to 1571. Remember, we were just at 1581. We're going to click OK. Now it's a 1571 drive. Now watch what happens when we go into 80 column mode. And we reboot it in 80 column mode. It's going to go ahead and detect that that's an auto boot disk, booting Pocket Writer 3, and it's just booting it directly from Gideon's Ultimate 1541. Is that cool or what? And Pocket Writer 3 auto boots for us. That's pretty nifty. Now, let's take a look at some of the other drive features available on this little guy. So, we're back at our Ultimate 1541 interface right here. Let's see what else it can do. If you hit Shift and then the F2 key, comes up with a nice little interface here. We'll go over some of these other features in a minute, but let's look at the drive settings. Drive A settings, that's like the primary drive. You can enable it, then you can tell it what kind of drive it is, 1541, 1571, or 1581, and it will default to that kind of drive. Okay, now you already saw when I was switching between D81 and D71 files, it will switch that for you automatically, which is awesome. Now here, because I have Jiffy DOS loaded on my Commodore 128, I've got a Jiffy DOS ROM, I'm telling it to use the Jiffy DOS ROMs on the virtual drive, which will speed up the virtual drives even when I'm working in Commodore 64 mode. All right, but look at this. We've got drive B. You can add a second virtual drive. Notice mine's disabled. You can tell it whatever kind of drive you want. You can give it a bus ID, whatever you want, and you can give it whatever ROM you want. It will let you physically have two virtual drives with just the one cartridge. So imagine a Commodore 64. You're emulating a 1541 drive, drive 8 for compatibility. You enable a 1581 drive virtually as drive 9, and you can put all kinds of files and store all kinds of data on that huge 800K drive and still have drive 8 just being a regular 1541. It's really cool. But is that all it can do? Just emulate disk drives awesomely? Heck no. The thing's a cartridge, so it can emulate just about any kind of cartridge that you want. So for example, I keep all my cartridges under my Kung Fu Flash folder. I can go ahead and go down here and say, la da 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 da, I want Zeta Wing 2 cartridge on here. These are all cartridge files. We're going to go hit enter. Run cart means you're going to use this as a cartridge until you power off the machine. Copy to flash actually copies that over to the flash memory of the device, and it will continue using that even after a power down and power up, because it's going to actually think it's got that cartridge installed. You don't want to do this much with a game, or it'll constantly be booting up to a game and you have to go in and tell it not to. But you'd want to do that if you were going to be using like the Epic's Fast Loader or one of the other cool cartridges, and you wanted that to just always think it was installed there. We're going to go ahead and do run cart. Witchsoft, our good friend Sarah Jane Avery. We love Sarah Jane. Now, I don't have any speakers hooked up to this at the moment. I took them off because they get in the way. But let's see. No, we won't load any settings. Let's start the game. And look at that beautiful Zeta Wing running right off cartridge, and it took about 5 seconds to set it up. This is a classic. Yay, Zeta Wing! Yay, cartridges! So now we've got two floppy drives emulated on here that can work really fast if you want to, put a fast load cartridge in here virtually. Works absolutely perfect, or use it for games. Is that all the Ultimate 1541 can do? Nay, nay. Look what else you can do. We're going to go back into Shift F2. We're going to go to C64 and cartridge settings. All right. If we had a cartridge permanently plugged in virtually, it would show up right there and we could take it off there, but we don't. Now look at this. RAM expansion unit, the REU. Enabled or disabled. REU size. I keep mine at 512 kilobyte. Yes, this will absolutely 100% of the time act like there's a 512 kilobyte REU plugged into my Commodore 128. That is freaking brilliant. And look at this. We can set it for 128, 256, 512, up to 16 megabytes. Now, a lot of the programs that are out there aren't going to recognize these larger capacities because they just didn't exist back in the day. But there are programs out there that will use a 1 meg, 2 meg, 4 meg, whatever, REU, without any issues at all. You can also tell it to go into GeoRAM mode, which is a special GEOS usage of RAM that works a little different than an REU, which is kind of cool. Now this is permanent. This is always on unless you turn it off, which is absolutely classic. Now you saw here that I have an IP address on my Ultimate 1541 because I have an Ethernet port plugged into it. I have an Ethernet plugged into it. What does this do? Well, this can emulate a modem. Not just any modem, and very importantly, it does not emulate a standard Commodore modem. This emulates the SwiftLink modem, which is a product that bypassed the normal communications port on the Commodore and can work up to 38,400 baud, which is cool. The caveat is your software has to support it. The good news is CCGMS supports it just fine. You give it a port to look at. Most of these things you don't have to mess around with, but we now have an actual modem on here that can work at 38,400 baud. Let's see how that works. Now, just for laughs, I've got CCGMS on my 1581 drive. So if I go ahead and load the directory here, see I've got CCGMS 2021. We're going to go ahead and load that. Silly Doug. I did (8), (1). That's on drive 11. That's a little better. Now it's loading it off my 1581. Now once we're in CCGMS, which is a really nice terminal program, we can go ahead and hit F7. Now by default, it's going to look at a user port modem. We just hit M till it says Swift Turbo, and I'm using the first one here, the memory address right there. Now we can crank up the baud rate. In theory, we should be able to crank it up to 38,400, but I'm not sure who I'm going to call supports it, so let's just try it like this. And then we can just dial away. Right through Telnet, right through the SwiftLink modem. Connects right up to Paradroid's BBS. Do you support Commodore graphics? Yes. Do you want 40 or 80 columns? Let's do 40. And look at that, Particles BBS. Isn't that nice? Now, just for laughs, let's go ahead and try this little higher here. So we've connected at 2400 baud using the built-in SwiftLink emulator that's built into the Ultimate 1541. Let's push our luck here and see if good old Paradroid can handle 38,400 baud. Now I know this works in desk term in full Commodore 128 mode because I tried it out today, but I have not really got it to work in CCGMS. Let's try it. Let's do ATDT s.dyndns.org :6400. Okay, we're going to try and connect at 38,400 baud. Oh, sorry, it's busy. Let's try it again. Okay, we're connected theoretically at 38,400 baud. Let's see if it feels like it. Certainly does feel faster. 40 columns. So it absolutely works at 38,400 baud. Oh, now you know my password is a series of $signs. Great. Now this is where 38,400 baud comes in handy. I've got it set on auto read all the messages on here. So what it's doing is it's just reading the messages, but look how fast it's pulling them in at 38,400 baud. I can have it saved to the buffer, say on the REU, and then go back and read them all later offline, which is actually pretty cool. Nice and zippity-doo-dah fast, huh? Not too bad for a $150 device. So you've seen how I can use the onboard networking to access BBSs and things like that. But what else this has is it has integrated Telnet capability, so you can literally Telnet right into the Ultimate 1541. Let me grab my laptop and I'll show you. From here, you can launch PuTTY, which is a great Telnet program. I'm going to go ahead and launch my Ultimate 1541 and open it and flip and look at this. Right on here, right on your computer, you have access to everything on here. So I can go in, I can change drives, and I'm going to go ahead and change to a different drive that's loaded. And there's Commodore 128. And we're going to put in, there we go, draw copy. I've just mounted draw copy. And if you heard in the background, it literally just launched the, connected the disk. Pretty cool, huh? You can also change all the drives and everything on here. So if I hit the F2 key, it actually gives me all of my settings, changing the drive types, changing the modem information. All of that is controllable through Telnet right on your PC. Pretty cool, huh? So why would you want to do that though? Why would you want to Telnet into it instead of just hitting the button and accessing your device? Well, I found with some Commodore 128 programs, when you go into 80 column mode, you literally can't switch back to the Ultimate 1541 screen without rebooting. It just, you hit the little switch, you go back to 40 column mode, and the display's corrupted, and I can't change disks. I reboot, everything's fine. But with the ability to Telnet into it, if I'm in 80 column mode on a word processor or something, and I want to change the virtual disk, just Telnet into it, boom, bing, bang, boom, change the virtual disk, everything's done. It's really kind of cool. You can also FTP into the device and put files on the device, on the Ultimate 1541, right through an FTP interface right into it. Let me show you something kind of crazy I did. Okay, so follow my logic here. I'm using my Amiga 1200 to run an FTP program, RNO transfer, which is looking at my PC through the SMB program. Okay, which is then connecting via FTP to my Ultimate 1541-2, which is on my Commodore 128 right over there. Why do I do these things? And why would I do something like that? I don't know, because I can. Let's talk about audio capabilities on this now. Come on over. So I told you that the Ultimate 1541 has an audio in for mixing and an audio out port. If you hit Shift F2 again, go to audio output settings, you'll see it has two options for SID chips. SID left and snooping on a particular address, SID right. Literally, the 1541 can emulate two SID chips to play back in stereo. And it does it in kind of a magical way. What it does, because the cartridge port does not directly have access to the data lines of the SID chip, it goes out and it sniffs these addresses here for audio information. And if it finds audio information, it plays it back as if it was playing it back on a SID chip. It's insane, but it actually works. And you can change the kind of SID chip it is, 6581 or 8580, like I believe the Commodore 128s have an 8580, but if you like the sound of the 6581 better, fine. If you want to take the audio from your SID chip, pass it through into the audio here, I guess effectively, in theory, you gotta have 3 SID chips. I mean, I don't know if anything supports them, but it's actually really cool. So that's gotta be it though, right? I mean, it literally, it can't do anything else, can it? I mean, this is insane what this thing can already do. Well, actually, there's another thing that it can do. If we go into our menus, we go to soft IEC drive settings. IEC drive is enabled. Soft drive bus ID 12, drive 12. Who's ever heard of drive 12? But watch what this can do. I can do load, comma, 12. Holy free holies. It's looking at the entire USB drive, USB 0, as a flippity flopping hard drive, just like you would see on an SD to IEC. And you can even send it commands. You have to use open and close commands. If I remember, I'll put those in the description to go dig deeper into these directories and actually execute files, go into D64 files right from here. It's really cool. And drive 12 is also accessible from some programs that allow you to connect multiple drives to your system. It's actually really cool. You can also, in addition to just being able to launch D64, and mount D64 files, you can also launch program files directly. And what it basically does is it emulates drive 8. So we'll go into this SID player. Here's just a PRG file. It's not a D64 file. That's a D64 file. This is just a PRG file. I can tell it to run it. It thinks it makes this virtual drive 8, and boom, it plays the particular program. Pretty cool, huh? You can launch programs directly. But seriously, now that's got to be it, right? It can't do anything else besides that. Well, it can. This thing can emulate a printer, a dot matrix printer. You can go in and you can tell it to emulate a CBM printer or an Epson printer, and it sets itself up. You're supposed to be able to set it to either drive or Unit 4 or Unit 5, but every time I change mine to Unit 5, it switches back to Unit 4 anyways. So I think there's a bug in the latest firmware. So you've got this virtual printer on device 4, all right? You send it a print job from any program, it will create a PNG file on the root of your USB drive for each page it prints out. And it's a dot matrix looking PNG file that you can then bring over to your regular computer and print out if you want to. It is crazy. Now, I will be 100% honest. The capabilities of the FujiNet, where it will emulate a virtual printer and create a multi-page PDF file, that's even cooler. Once they get this where it can create a multi-page PDF file instead of individual pages of PNG, that's even better. But the way it is right now is pretty cool. So what I've done is I've set my Okidata 120 to ID 5, and then I've got my virtual printer on ID 4. When I want to print a virtual page, I send it to 4. When I want to print a hard copy, I send it to 5. Most good productivity software allows you to choose sending it to printer 4 or printer 5. It's really kind of cool. There's features on the Ultimate 1541. Hit the F5 key and you have options, say, to create a blank D41, D71, or D81 file. So what you do with that is, let's say you've created this D71 file and you've got a floppy disk, a double-sided floppy. You put that in your 1571 and you can go in and use any copy program to copy it to a virtual .d71 file you just created. You just made yourself a D71 file, a virtual disk file. Do the same for D64 and the D81 files. It's pretty sweet. Now, there is a utility on here that's supposed to do that for you. It worked with older firmwares, and it was really, really fast, where you could just say, you know, take this disk, make a D64, and it would do it in like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. It's broken on the current firmware. Hopefully they get that fixed with the next firmware, but we'll see. Now, I'm so happy that the Ultimate 1541 version 2 works so well on the Commodore 128. I was concerned at first when I bought it that it would only work on the Commodore 64 or on the Commodore 128 in 64 mode. But no, this thing, very, very, very few limitations working on a Commodore 128. The biggest one is when I'm in 80 column mode and I launch a program with graphics in it, I can't get back to the interface without rebooting the system. Not the end of the world. It's just, you know, the VDC takes over and it's not passing stuff back to the VIC chip the way it's supposed to. Don't know why. Devices like the awesome Kung Fu Flash, the awesome SD to IEC, they can do some of what this can do, and they're substantially less expensive, you know, less than half the price for the most part. So there's still a market for those. If you don't need all the bells and whistles, the Kung Fu Flash is fantastic. The SD to IEC is fantastic. I still use them on some of my other machines, but this, man, this just has everything you need. It's just incredible. And I recommend, if you can afford it and you only want to buy one thing for your Commodore 64 or your Commodore 128, get Gideons Ultimate 1541 version 2. It is sweet. Huge thanks to all my awesome patrons who you see here printing out on my beautiful Oki Data 120 printer right out of Pocket Writer. Look at all these beautiful people. If you want to join in the fun, hop on over to patreon.com/10mark, and you too can join this illustrious 9-pin list. Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed exploring both my Commodore 128 and the Ultimate 1541 version 2. It's a piece of work, it is. This entire episode was written, edited, and printed on my Commodore 128. Got it right here. Nice little dot matrix. So everything was done right on my Commodore 128. Now I'll check and I'll see if I can load my video editing software from Blackmagic Design, DaVinci Resolve. I'll see if I can load that on the Commodore 128. Somehow I think it may not work. Please like and subscribe, comment below, talk to me about what solution you use for a virtual disk drive, or tell me about your adventures with the Ultimate 1541. Follow me on all the socials. I'm on all of them except for Twitter. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.